Hi everyone, welcome to Troubleshooting PubMed Searches. My name is Emily Gilbert. I'm one of the liaison librarians at Library of the Health Sciences. Specifically, I work with College of Medicine, and I have been with UIC for about 4 years. So talking about PubMed searches is one of my favorite things because there's so much that can go wrong, but there's also so much that can go right. So today we'll talk about how to make your searches a little more effective and things you can do to tweak your searches. So hopefully get the best possible results. All right, just a housekeeping note. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. And we will send out the link to the recording to everyone who registered after the session. And if you have any questions that can be answered in the chat, my colleague Jason is here with me. He might, if it's something he can answer quickly. Otherwise, he'll let me know that there's a question in there because I can't see both screens at once. So just bear with us. Thank you. All right. So when we talk about troubleshooting PubMed, these are some of the issues we hear from people that they have. So you might do a search and get articles that don't contain your keywords at all. You might search for a phrase in quotation marks and get an error message and results that don't include that phrase. You might be using a systematic review search strategy from an article and get an error message. You might find a mesh term that describes your topic well, but you're not getting very much when you search with it. And you also might specify a location, but find that they're not all the studies from there are not actually all from that location. So are there solutions? Uh, kind of, hopefully. It's not a binary, we're not going to be able to solve every single problem and make your search absolutely perfect because no such search exists. You're always going to have to do a little screening of the results to find what you need, but there are definite ways that we can make your search better. So this is what we're talking about today, the little tweaks you can do. So just a couple reminders. You may hear us use PubMed and Medline, us in the library or people outside the library. They sometimes get used interchangeably. So Medline is a database that has a lot of content from biomedical journals. And then PubMed is the platform on which you can search that database. So there is some additional content that comes in with PubMed that isn't from Medline, but the vast majority of it is coming from Medline. And then also, if you aren't aware of MESH terms, that stands for medical subject headings. These are what's used on the back end of PubMed. There's specific terms that are used to index articles in Medline. So they do also appear in most articles in PubMed. So when you are troubleshooting, here are some potential things you can troubleshoot. You can look at, for example, the search details. You can look at the search fields that you are searching. You can look at your phrase searching, your proximity searching, hyphens and spaces, truncation, changes in mesh headings, acronyms, names, and locations. And we will talk about all of these in more detail. But the big picture is that PubMed thinks it knows what you want, and it's going to try really hard to be helpful, quote unquote helpful, not always super helpful. But it will, if you search something, just a regular keyword, if you throw in heart attack in PubMed, it's going to help you by pulling in terms and subject headings that it thinks will be relevant to your search. So if you search heart attack, it's going to automatically also search the mesh term for myocardial infarction. So sometimes this doesn't really make much of a difference, and you're going to get only what you searched for. And other times it might bring in many additional terms. So like we can see on the slide, if you search for insurance, it's also searching the words insurability, insurable, insurance carriers, insurer, insurers, insurances, insurance, and also insurance, the mesh term. So we think about the automatic term mapping, like, is it a good thing? Well, that's also complicated. Sometimes yes, because it can bring you new search terms and new subject headings that are relevant without you having to brainstorm to get them yourself. And sometimes no, it is not. Sometimes it'll bring things in that are just irrelevant and that you do not want. So how can you tell what PubMed is doing on the back end? So that specifically is where you go for the search details. So the search details, if we look at this page here that I have on the slide, so this search was for diabetes and information and teenagers. And then we get this article in the results, which it mentions diabetes, but it does not seem to mention teenagers or information. So why is that? Well, if we look at the search details, we can figure that out. So to get there, you just need to click on the advanced area, the advanced button below the search box, and then it'll bring you to the advanced page where you'll see your search history, and then you click on that little caret. I don't know if you can see my cursor very well, but right down here. So that caret is what you click on to show the history, and then, or the details rather. And then if you look at the details for this search, you will notice that there is quite a lot going on here. Bear with me, I'm trying to, it's showing up very small on my laptop. So you'll see it's giving diabetes, but also the mesh term for diabetes mellitus. It's also bringing in terms like diabetes insipidus. It's also searching inform, informal, informality, not just information. And then teenagers is more straightforward. It's searching terms for teenagers, adolescent, and then also pulling in the mesh term for adolescent. So why did we get this article when it doesn't look like it was very useful? So that, if we look in the abstract, we see that it has the word inform in there. So since we just searched information without any syntax with it, no quotation marks, no field codes, which we'll talk about more, it is also pulling in the word inform, and then it also has the mesh term for adolescent. So that is why this is coming up. So you might be thinking, well, if I have this whole search down here that has all of the different terms it is looking for, can I just go in and delete stuff I don't want? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can copy the expanded version of that search into the query box and then start deleting anything you don't want to included or to be included. But you have to be very careful, especially because there will often be parentheses in your search. And if you accidentally delete a closing parenthesis, but not an open parenthesis, then it will mess up the search and it won't run properly. So just make sure you're leaving the formatting in there if you do any deleting like that. So use with caution. All right, search fields. So search fields are also called like field descriptors or field tags. And when PubMed does automatic term mapping, it defaults to searching for all of the map terms, or the map terms in all fields of the record. So that includes any mesh headings, it includes affiliations, grant titles. So search fields, using the field tags is how you can control where in the record a term is searched for. Also, if you use a search field or a field tag with your search, then you are going to turn off the automated term mapping. So it is going to do a much more literal search. It's only going to be for the specific term or term variation. But this can significantly change the number of results that you receive. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see what I mean. You might be like, what do you mean where it searches? So this is what an article record looks like on the back end of PubMed. And you might be able to see down the left side, there are all these little 2 to 4 letter abbreviations, like PMID is PubMed identification number. TI is title, AB is abstract. So this is what it is searching on the back. Oh, okay, my lights just went off. That's what it's searching on the back end to when you're actually doing the search. So if you specify what fields you're going to go into, then it makes for a much more precise search. So there is a full list of field descriptors and field tags. You can take a look at them if you want, but the ones that we use the most are TI for title, AB for abstract, and sometimes TW for text words. So text word, TW, it includes all of the words and numbers in the title, abstract, mesh terms, mesh subheadings, publication types, any substance names. There's a lot going on there. So it is searching a larger chunk of the record for sure. If you search with just TI, like in the example at the top here, that is searching only in the title. The reason you would want to do that is because often if a term is important enough to an article, it will appear in the title. Or you might want to expand that a little more and do title and abstract, which is TIAB. I don't think you can combine all of the field tags like that, but TIAB is very commonly used among librarians who search PubMed. So that is one where you can just kind of shove the two together. But I don't think it works that way for others. So you can see when we did TIAB versus TI, we got over 4,000 more results. And then doing text word instead of TIAB, that TW gave us another 600-700 articles. And then if we just did moles by itself, so not using a field tag, that means it is using that automatic term mapping, that jumped up from 5,600 articles to 28,000. So you can see how that really changes depending on what you're using when you search. And here is the full details for those searches. So you can see it is using for the mesh terms, it's for the one where it's using automatic term mapping at the bottom, it's bringing in the mesh term for pigmented nevus. It's also searching the words nevus, pigmented, pigmented nevus, mole, nevus, moles plural, all right, and moles mesh term. So it's getting a lot more in there, and that is why that search is a lot less specific than the other ones where you're using a field tag. So how you can search using search fields, you can just manually type in the brackets with TI or TIAB or whatever it is. But you can also go into the advanced search builder in PubMed and use this drop down, which might be a little easier. So at least until you get used to it. So you can select title and abstract in the drop down and then put in whatever term you want it to apply to, and then click add over on the right side, and that would add it to your query builder. If you have any questions on this so far, please go ahead and put them in the chat where Jason is keeping an eye out for me on any questions that come in. I know that was a lot with learning about automatic term mapping and the different field tags. So I'm just going to take 1 second to get a drink of water and then we'll move on. Okay. All right, well, let's forge ahead then. Another way you can really change your search is by using phrases and quotation marks. So many databases will do phrase searching. That's where you're searching for two words right next to each other. Excuse me. Like swine flu or mental illness, like it says on the slide. So if you put them in parentheses, it will search for those words with each other as a distinct phrase. Some databases default to assuming that two words are a phrase, but many others, including PubMed, would search two words separately unless you specifically put them in quotation marks. So, like using search fields, if you're using quotation marks in PubMed, that will turn off the automatic term mapping. So you can see the difference here when we search swine flu without quotation marks, and with quotation marks, we get 3,000 less when we search with the quotation marks. With mental health, it's obviously something there's been a lot more written about, so it takes us down like a whole 100,000 and some change by just adjusting the punctuation there, adding the quotation marks. So this is a really easy thing you can do to make your search better. Then if we look at the details for all of these, you'll see that it is being very precise when you have those punctuation marks. It is only searching for that term. And in the other ones where you left them off, it's doing the same thing we've seen with the automatic term mapping, where it's bringing in relevant mesh terms and other related terms as well. So, all right, yeah, so actually for swine flu, that's interesting. I just noticed it's searching swines and human influenza. So that may be a little off there. But there is a caveat with phrase searching in PubMed, and that is that PubMed has to recognize a phrase in order to search for it. So for example, if you search for cultural humility toolkit, there is an article called that, but this phrase is not in the phrase index. So if it's not in the phrase index, it'll give you a warning with that little exclamation point. And then it'll say cultural humility toolkit. It's not found in the phrase index. So if you were searching only cultural humility toolkit, you might get results that do not include that because it's, it's bringing in all of these extra terms since it's not doing the phrase searching. So a good example of this actually from a search I was doing last week is I found out last week there are a lot of ways to say medically complex children. You could say children with medical complexity, medically complex children. I also saw one that said medically fragile and complex children. And then when I tried to put all of these into PubMed, it took all of them except medically fragile and complex children. So that was one that it had not recognized as a phrase. It's not in the literal index. So I couldn't search with it, which is okay, but you just need to know what it's doing so it isn't then, hijacking your search and bringing in a bunch of other terms because you're not then using anything to stop the automatic field mapping. There are also some words called stop words that PubMed will default to ignoring, even if they are included in quotes. So I don't remember enough about English grammar to tell you what kind of words these are, but prepositions, maybe some of them. I don't know, not my specialty, but all of these words are going to be ignored even if they're in the quote. So that's also really good to know. All right, let's move on to proximity searching. My light went off again. Come on. There we go. Okay. Proximity searching. So what is it? This searches for individual words within a distance of each other, but in any order. So search terms can be any words within quotes, but they don't necessarily have to be in that order. You can use it in the fields title or title abstract. And the N there is the maximum number of words that can be within your search terms. So, for example, children with medical complexity, I might want to look for children, the words children, medical, and complexity within one or two words of each other, because maybe it's going to say children with neurodivergence and medical complexity or something like that. But it would still be a useful article. So you have to decide, and usually you can just like figure it out by trial and error. There's no limit to the number of words you can search together in proximity, but the more terms you enter into those quotation marks and then use a proximity search, the more restrictive it'll become. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. So here are some differences. If we search hip pain without the quotation marks, hip pain with quotation marks, hip pain with quotation marks, and title and abstract, and then you see the difference with 2 words in between and with 5 words in between. It really will take some trial and error because it could be like pain in the hip, or it could be pain and the leg and hip, in the leg and hip. So these are just some scenarios that can happen. Depends on how broad you need your search to be, how, like if it's a systematic review, then you might want to be a little more broad, but of course I would always say contact a librarian for help with that. So here is an excellent example, pain around the hip joint. and then hip/groin pain. So that's what you get with 2 in between. Oh, and then hip related pain also. So that is a good thing to consider because sometimes you would miss things like this if you only did hip pain. All right, limitations of proximity searching. You can only do it with the title and abstract field tags. Stop words are included if they're within the quotes. So that's different from your regular phrase searching. The quotations will still stop automatic term mapping. It is not compatible with truncation, which I believe we'll talk a little bit more about later. So if you use a wildcard symbol like an asterisk, that will just be ignored. And like I was saying, it takes some trial and error to figure out what your useful end value is going to be. But it can be combined with Boolean searches. So you could do hip pain within 2 words of each other in the title and abstract and teen. And this is also a pretty new function in PubMed. So it's possible that it will be refined over time. Another thing that can cause issues is hyphens and spaces. So in PubMed, hyphens are treated like spaces most of the time. So again, this is really small on my screen, so bear with my extreme close-up here. But if we look at like ultra running with the hyphen and with the space, they're the same. Middle-aged with the hyphen and with the space are not the same. But then, yeah, okay, so that's the difference there. Middle-aged with a hyphen and middle-aged with a space, if they're in quotes, are not the same. So let's look at the details here. So I'm just going to turn around and look at the screen here. So when we're searching middle-aged without quotes and without the hyphen, that is searching middle-aged together. It's doing the mesh term. It looks like it's doing the same thing as with the hyphen, but then ultra running is with the hyphen, it does a more complete search, and without the hyphen, it brings in like running the mesh term. So it's not precise, but there is a difference between a recognized mesh term and something that has been constructed, like ultra running. So it is important to take a look at your details there and decide whether a hyphen or space is useful. If you have a drug name that has numbers, brackets, parentheses, spaces, hyphens, it can sometimes struggle to find these. So we have a pharmacy liaison librarian named Tina. She's wonderful. Talking with her would be a great idea if you're having trouble with drug names, because those are not always a consistent thing in PubMed. Sometimes you really have to play around and figure it out. So Tina's your person for that. And you can always contact us and say you need help with a drug search. And even if you don't remember her name, we will get it over to her. All right, speaking of truncation, the next thing that we're covering is truncation, which means searching for any and all variations of a term that start with the same set of letters. So you truncate at the point after which the terms start to vary. So for teen, teens, teenager, teenage, you would just put it after the TEEN and then the asterisk. And this will also turn off automatic term mapping. So we have teen right there with the truncation. And then sometimes there are some unexpected variations. In this case, we have a last name that starts with teen. So that is something that you would have to keep in mind. Also, it does have to be a minimum of 4 characters. I remember trying to do this once with the word racism to get races, racial, racism, racist, and you can't do it with RAC and an asterisk. I mean, there's also too many things that start with those letters that it wouldn't be a good idea anyway. But yeah, this is also a very iterative function. I would recommend trying it out and seeing if your truncation looks like it's actually helping. If it's bringing in too many things that are not useful, then you might need to pivot. So also a very iterative function. So when you do truncation, you are still getting less than when you use all of the variations of teen or teenager or teenaged or teens. And why are we getting so much less, like millions less? The answer is, of course, the automatic term mapping. So truncation is stopping the mapping to subject headings and to other terms. But if you put in all of those variations on the word with or in between them, you are getting all of those extra terms and mesh terms as well. Speaking of mesh terms, what happens when you use them but something doesn't work? So this could happen, for example, if you are looking at an older systematic review. This is a screenshot from a systematic review from 2014. And you might see, well, for one thing, the mesh terms, the syntax has changed in PubMed. So a search wouldn't look like that, like it used to. But also one of those is no longer a mesh term. Hearing impaired persons has changed to, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it is worded differently in the mesh term now. So that is something you have to be careful of if you're trying to replicate an older systematic review or even get ideas for terms. Double check the mesh terms to see what's going on there. Okay, so here it is. If we look up hearing impaired persons with mesh, we're not getting anything. And it's because it is now persons with hearing impairments. So if you go into the mesh database, of which there is a link at the bottom of every PubMed homepage, then you can search for hearing impaired person and it will bring you to the correct term. So that's almost always the case for any terms that have changed. So using the updated mesh term, then we start getting our results. You might also find that there are some terms that bring back less content than expected. So here's a search for adolescent mothers, the mesh term, but we're getting only 70 results. And we would assume that over the course of time, there have been more things written about adolescent mothers than 70, right? But if we go into the mesh database, you see that this term was only introduced in 2022. So older content may just have not been re-indexed yet, which now you know. So you may have to change the way you search for that and also include some keywords too to make sure you're getting what you're looking for. Acronyms are another fun topic in PubMed. When they work, they can work well. MRSA brings up the correct term for MRSA, the mesh term and all of the ways you can put in the keywords. Sometimes they only sort of work. So VRE, we have a couple different things that, well, this one, it is bringing up VRE, but it's probably not bringing up everything. It would probably make more sense to write in the entire term, which I'm very obviously avoiding saying because I don't know how to pronounce it. But then when they don't work at all, something like EMT, well, what is that referring to? It could be the journal Enzyme and Microbial Technology, could be an emergency medical technician, epithelial mesenchymal transition, endometrial thickness, electromagnetic therapy. It could be any of those things. So if you're struggling with that, what you can do is certainly make an appointment with a librarian, and we'll be happy to work with you on that. But then I'm going to turn around and look at the slide so it's larger. Okay, so you can see that if you do all of the different searches there, then it will give you the correct terms and the correct mapping as long as you're writing it out all the way. Okay, just making sure. Names are also an interesting thing in PubMed. So if you put in the last name plus first and middle initials, or just first initial, or the full name format and no search tag, it'll search the author as long as they exist in PubMed. But PubMed does not disambiguate. So other than through initials and algorithmic weighting. So if the name is common, it can be helpful to know where that person was affiliated at the time they wrote whatever you're looking for. So when we looked for Griffin here, we got 23,000 different articles written by somebody Griffin. But if we specifically search for Griffin T, my colleague Tina, and University of Illinois, that brings up 9 articles that she's been on. So then if you search for Fox, that can be different because in this case, there's a name problem and an acronym problem. So certain names that mean other things or might be acronyms, you have to be careful of that too. And then finally, this one is a name that can have a different meaning. So you see how it brings in the mesh term for morphine derivatives, but on the bottom search there, but then if you search for it with the author subtag, which you can, or the author field tag, you can do that, and that will make your search a lot more precise. And then you see in the one down there, it was searching in all fields, so not just author. All right, let's talk about locations. Mesh does have geographic location categories that includes names of continents, countries, states, geographic locations as part of nomenclature. There are some back indexing, but it only takes effect at the end of the year. So you will find articles about Ukraine under USSR and also under Eastern Europe, depending on when. So if we look at the geographic locations, I'm going to bring this over to my other monitor here. There we go. So you can see if we scroll down, There are some cities that have their own terms, like Chicago has a term, London has a term, there's Seoul, Tokyo, no Sao Paulo, no Warsaw, you know, it really just depends. Um, then if we look at Europe, there's a lot going on there. We have the European Alpine region, but also France, Switzerland, Italy, Luxembourg. So there's the Mediterranean region. If we open that up, let's see. So that also includes the Mediterranean islands, but of course, a lot of things are on the Mediterranean. So you can see how squishy it gets very quickly. So the locations are not always precise. I would say most of the time they are not precise. Another thing is that it doesn't, there is a location ID in the field tags, but that doesn't link to a physical location. And then place of publication is where the journal is published, not necessarily where the study took place. So if you use title and abstract, you can do that with cities, states, and countries. It can be difficult to create a list that will find everything. If you were doing USA, for example, how many cities do you put in there? You know, how big is a city to be important enough to go into your keywords? I have done one for Africa, which is interesting because you can do Africa and then terms like North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then you can also list out all of the keywords, but then you have to be careful because you want Guinea to come up, but not Papua New Guinea. So there are a lot of different considerations there. A grant number field might also be searched, which might include the home country of the grant agency. The affiliation address information might be in there, so that might make something come up that's irrelevant. And clinicaltrials.gov does provide the study location, but not all studies are registered there. So you just kind of have to work around it as best you can. And of course, I would always recommend a librarian appointment to help you sort through that. All right, so those are all of the things that we talked about troubleshooting. So in the end, what should you do? Well, it really depends. You might ask yourself, is it important enough? Does it interfere with my results enough that it's worth changing my search? Can you edit your search to fix the problem? Or should you just be flat out using a different database? That's also a consideration. PubMed is not the end all be all of everything. So make sure you ask one of us if you need help. All right, and we'll move on to questions, but just quickly, I wanted you to have my contact info. We have a landing page for this workshop series that we're doing this week. And then tomorrow is the Finding Retractions workshop with my lovely colleague, Tina. The recording will be sent out this week. And then there is an evaluation link. Jason, if you wouldn't mind throwing that in the chat. That is, I would love to hear your honest feedback on how this went today. And it also helps me for tenure, which I appreciate. All right, let me get back to the Zoom. Oh, it's just us. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Take care.